I think the key to this election, understanding this election, is the fear of the middle class. The middle class is afraid they're losing out, that their future is not secure. The two candidates tried to appeal to the middle class, to assuage their fears. And in the end, I think Barack Obama is the one who was able to convince them that he understood their concerns and had their interests at heart. What pushed those last undecideds over the edge? I think a few things, but certainly the hurricane, Hurricane Sandy, served to demonstrate what it means when you have an effective, competent federal government. Shows that there are times when people need to turn to the government and hope that that government can deliver the sorts of services that will guarantee their future. And so I think that became almost a metaphor for what was driving this election. What was new, I think, was in a qualitative way, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, the volume of money that went into this campaign, the activities of the so-called super PACs, who were able to spend unlimited amounts of money in support of this or that candidate. That was new, but I think what we'll realize after we look at the data more closely is that money did not play a decisive role. I mean, Americans want bipartisanship in the abstract, but when you raise a particular issue and ask whether Congress or the President should compromise on this particular issue, oftentimes you get a very different answer. So there's some sort of a disconnect between the abstract notion of bipartisanship and the concrete decisions that have to be made on particular policy issues. That said, we're not going to go anywhere the day after the election unless there is some change in the approach that both the executive and the legislative take to governing. The day after the election looks quite a lot like the day before, and that is we have a Democrat in the White House. We have a small Senate majority that is Democratic, and we have the House of Representatives firmly in the hands of the Republican Party. That means that without some sort of compromise, without some sort of move to the middle on the major issues of the day, we're going to have gridlock. Domestic policy is foreign policy in the United States right now. That is, unless we can get our economic house in order, we don't have the basis for projecting power and stability around the world. And that basis is at jeopardy because we're in debt, because we have a very slow recovery, because we have a trade imbalance that is structural and ongoing. And so unless we can get the economic house in order, it's going to be very difficult to project power, to project stability in a world that needs American leadership. Now, with respect to the specific question of the Middle East, I think two things are noteworthy here. The first is that by being reelected, Obama demonstrates to his partners or interlocutors in the region that they've got to deal with him now for the next 4 years. So there's not going to be any more game playing as we saw in the last year or two, in particular the efforts of some in the Israeli political establishment to engage in or enter into American domestic political debates, or to make the question of Israel a question of American domestic politics. The other thing that's going to be, I think, equally important moving forward is the results of the Israeli election. Is Netanyahu going to be reelected? If so, with what sort of a coalition? It's the developments within Israeli domestic politics that will be as important as domestic politics in the United States for defining the nature of the relationship between Israel and the United States moving forward. That said, it's also important to note that the Palestinians have done a very poor job of producing a leader or a leadership that can negotiate in good faith with the Israelis, and if in fact the two sides were to come to a deal, is strong enough at home, that is within the Palestinian community, to sell an agreement. And until the Palestinians can produce a credible and competent leadership, it's difficult even for a willing Israeli leadership to move forward. I think the key to this election is that the American people, by a narrow margin, but by a margin, voted for the welfare state. That is to say, they want a state that provides a certain set of services and safety nets that make it possible for everyone to prosper and enjoy the benefits of life in the United States. The question that's unanswered is who's going to pay for that welfare state, and how are we going to pay for that welfare state? The answer that President Obama gave during the election was, well, the wealthy are going to have to pay more. And that sold well. I think that resonated with the electorate. But if, in fact, we're going to be able to move forward on the sort of agenda that Obama has set out, an agenda that's about investing in infrastructure, investing in education, investing in renewable energies, sort of getting the country ready for the competition of the 21st century, the economic competition in a globalized marketplace. If we're going to move forward on those types of investments, we're going to have to do more than just ask the wealthy to pay more. The middle class is going to have to decide which aspects of the welfare state it's willing to give up. And so the challenge for Obama is to both convince the middle class that he has their best interests at heart, but also that they're going to have to carry some of the burden of reinvesting in the United States, drawing down the structural deficit, and that's going to be a challenging task for him. I think there are two narratives coming out of the defeat of Governor Romney last night. The first suggests that Governor Romney had to make too many concessions to the right wing of the Republican Party in order to get the nomination. He had to take a very strong position on the question of taxes, tax reductions. He had to take a very strong or perhaps even extreme position on questions of senior citizens' health care, turning the Medicare program into a voucher program. He had to take an extreme position on Obamacare, the Health Care Reform Act that actually looked quite similar to the Health Care Reform Act that he passed when he was governor of Massachusetts. He had to take a very extreme position on questions of reproductive rights and women's access to reproductive health services. And all of that, some would argue, led the voter of the middle, the undecided, the swing state voter of the middle to the president. It drove moderate voters, moderate Republican voters away. That's one narrative. The other narrative is that after the convention, after his nomination, Governor Romney ran to the middle. He increasingly looked like a moderate. And in the debates, he increasingly looked like Barack Obama. If you think about the foreign policy debate, the third of the three debates, it was sort of the Me Too debate, where he more or less said, I agree with the president on that issue. I agree with the president on this issue. And this Me Too myth started to look like Obama Light. And if you have a choice between Obama Light and the real thing, why not vote for the real thing? So I think the second narrative, which you'll hear from the right wing of the Republican Party, is that the problem was this candidate ran away from the issues that would have led him to win. How that debate within the Republican Party plays out will be very significant for the future. The Republican Party, if it's going to have a future, is also going to have to come to terms with the changing demographics of the United States. If you look at the majority that President Obama put together, it's a majority of minorities. There is no majority ethnic group, there is no majority religious group in this winning coalition. It's a majority comprised of minorities. And the United States is becoming a country of minorities. The traditional white, European, Protestant American is only one of many minorities today. And if the Republicans are going to be effective in the future, they're going to have to appeal to more than just that traditional Republican base.